All right, on this chapter right here, we still in NegusPedia and Negranica. I want to chronicle the biblical figures in the classical myth of the Greeks and the European chronologies of the Bible to the Annals of the kings of Egypt and the real things that these things come from out of the land of Egypt. Now, we was talking about the time of King Tutmosis III, which is the same time of the biblical Moses in the Bible. And I'm saying Tutmosis III on the hieroglyphs in Egypt and it's all these monuments and statues is the biblical man Moses, because he was a lawgiver. And that's what I'm trying to say. But I'm going to read from this document I wrote many years ago, and I, sent this to the Library of Congress. It's called The Heritage. I'm going to read a paragraph from it, okay? This is what it says. In Exodus 1:8, now there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph and the tribes of Israel, and the covenants the former kings had made in Israel. In the 13th dynasty at Memphis, the book of Joshua calls him the Pharaoh Malal, who I identified as Amenemhat the fifth. And he afflicted the children of Israel. Amenemhat the fifth, because it's two kingdoms in Egypt, Upper and Lower Egypt. So in Lower Egypt, in Memphis, he was Amenemhat the fifth. But I believe the chronology got messed up right here. The same Amenemhat the fifth is also a pharaoh called Ahmose the first. He wanted to be distinguished from the rest of his predecessors who had the same name, Amenemhat. One, Amenemhat the second, the third, and then the fourth. This Amenemhat the fifth wanted to be different from the rest of it. He didn't want to be named Amenemhat the fifth. He didn't want to be the fifth man named Amenemhat, so he changed his name to Ahmose the first. And then they had the new kingdom. This was the beginning of the new kingdom in Egypt. Which the new kingdom begins with that Ahmose the first figure. In the 13th dynasty, that's a Amenemhat, the third, the fourth, and then the fifth Amenemhat, he was not recorded with the kings list in the 13th dynasty, because in classical myth, this is the Trojan War. Okay. All right, I want to say that. The book of Joshua called him Melol, M-E-L-O-L, Melal. He afflicted the children of Israel and began to spill the blood of the male children's blood while building the elaborate palace at Pithom and Ramesses. That temple, we call it Dir el-Bahari today, the labyrinth. The book of Herodotus, the history talks about this as well. At Memphis. Amenemhat the fifth got sick and died from a plague, and his son was called Adakam Ahuz, who we say is Amenemhat the seventh, a dwarf who began to reign in place of his father, because his older brother Moron was lame and not able to rule. So Moron would have been Amenemhat the sixth. Instead, the seventh Amenemhat, who would probably be almost the second. We got to look at the kings list. I'll look up into it, but we're going to stay focused right here in that period. This is the period that's misconstrued by the Britannica and all of the European chronologists, because this is not their stories. They took these stories and changed the name of the people in Greek. So, all right. The 10 plagues, then the Exodus, I have dated at negative number 1667 or 1666 BC. Coming out of Egypt with the spoils of war, 40 years in the wilderness. I have a negative 1666 to a negative 1626, which is 220 years preceding the time that all of the European nations in America and Great Britain who chronicled this event, they say 1446 BC. So my date is 220 years preceding what they say. So in the NegusPedia and Negranica. So 1666 BC, to 1626 BC. It's the Passover, or going 40 years in the wilderness with Moses. Then the conquest of the land of Canaan after Moses died. With Joshua conquering only one half of the land of Canaan and not all the lands like God intended. The year I have is negative 1626 to 1599 BC. The time of the judges in Israel beginning with Othniel, 1590 to 1550 BC, and ending with the last of the judges, Samson, a negative 1266 to 1226 BC, when Israel were in the hands of the Philistines, children of Canaan, 40 years. Judges 20 through 21. The tribe of Benjamin was almost exterminated and cut off from the rest of Israel at Mizpah, at Jabesh Gilead. The last men from the tribe of Benjamin intermingled with 400 Canaanite women from Jabesh Gilead at the camp of Shiloh to prevent Benjamin from being without inhabitants among the rest of the tribes of Israel. Because a Levite had, that story is about a Levite and his concubine came into the land of Benjamin, and the woman wouldn't obey her husband, and she went and played the whore with the men of Benjamin. And she was ravished one night. They all had sex with the same woman. And then she came back to the Levite priest who was her husband, and he didn't take her back because she had been polluted by all those men. She had played the whore, and they ravished her. They all had sex with the same woman. So he didn't accept her back into his house. He cut her up into 12 pieces, and then a war started with the tribe of Benjamin with the rest of Israel, because never such a thing has been done in the house of Israel. That's just something the God of Israel always had prophesied against sexual immorality, and the tribe of Benjamin knew this. I don't know why the men chose not to obey God, but they ravished the woman. She wanted to play the whore with them. They all had sex with her. Then a war broke out with the rest of Israel against Benjamin. So that's in the book of Judges. All right. But Benjamin wouldn't be without inhabitants. 400 Canaanite women from Jabesh Gilead went to the camp of Shiloh to prevent Benjamin from being without inhabitants amongst the rest of the tribes of Israel, but separated from Israel because of their sins. Their sin was sexual immorality. They played the whore with a priest's wife, a priestess concubine, a Levite priestess concubine. That was their sin. Playing the whore with her, fornicating with the woman. Then a war started over that shit. So, all right. Saul was the first king of Israel. So he was a Benjamite. Now, if you know what the Canaanite women, Canaanites are black people. Canaanites are dark-skinned black people. Okay. But the way they tell the story from the Europeans chronicling about Saul, they'll make Saul to be a white man, they'll make King David to be white. So I just want to just explain that to you. That wasn't white people. The way a European Renaissance biblical storyteller would tell the story. Okay. He was a Benjamite, Saul, the first king. 1 Samuel 31. The tragic end of Saul and his sons I have at 1230 BCE. Then David, son of Jesse, becomes king of all of Israel. All his acts in his lifetime written in the book of Samuel and Kings. The first book of Kings, chapter 6:1. It says, Solomon builds the temple in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt. In the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Zib, the 2nd month that he began to build the house of the Lord, I have at 1186 BCE, from the way I chronicled it from the book of Jasher. I thought that was the best source of information. I thought everything in the Bible was incorrect. Now, the Bible going to tell you 220 years different than what I just said. I said 1186. You take 220 years from that, This is what the Europeans tell you. 966 BC. So I'm going to look at the Annals of the Kings of Egypt. So the temple in Jerusalem was being built 480 years after the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt. So that came up to be, according to the Europeans in the Britannica and all of that, 966 BC. And that would be in the reign, if the Chronicles is right, the way they chronicled it, 966 BC, in the reign of a king named Simon. Simon. You see the Simon, Solomon. In the Bible, they called him Solomon. But that's a pharaoh at that same very period, in the late period, 21st dynasty, at Tanis, with high priest of Ammon ruling as virtual kings at Thebes at the best. I believe this Solomon, the way they tell it in Europe and in America, the biblical Solomon is this king called Simon, whose name happens to be at the same very time period of Solomon building the temple in Jerusalem, the first temple in Jerusalem, which they say is 966 BC. I say it preceded what they say, 220 years, because they made chronological errors during the 13th and 18th dynasty. So the way the Bible is chronicled from the 13th to the 18th dynasty, from the end of Genesis to the Exodus to the Book of Kings, it's incorrectly chronicled. These are not the stories of the Greeks. So I believe Simon is biblical King Solomon. It's a pharaoh of the 21st dynasty named Simon. We're going to do more research on that. I'm going to take something what Herodotus, the history, says. From Book 2, 50. Book 250 says, almost all the names of the gods came into Greece from Egypt. My inquiries prove that they were all derived from a foreign source. And my opinion is that Egypt furnished the greater number. For with the exception of Neptune and the Dioscuri, whom I mentioned above, and Juno, Vesta, Themis, the Graces, and the Nereids, the other gods have been known from time immemorial in Egypt. And this I assert on the authority of the Egyptians themselves, the gods with whose names they professed themselves acquainted, the Greeks received, I believe, from the Pelasgi, except Neptune. Of them, they got their knowledge from the Libyans. So the Libyans worshiped the god of the sea, who they called Dagon. And the Greeks called Poseidon, and the Romans called Neptune. Okay, from the Libyans. The Libyans, or who I say is the Western Empire of Kemet, and they are the people who are called the Olmecs, the Olmecs in Mexico. So by whom he has been always honored, and who were anciently the only people that had a god of that name. The Egyptians differ from the Greeks also in paying no divine honors to the heroes.